So, unlike me, I made notes. I'm organized today, and I've been told that I have to go from my notes. So, after our in-depth panel chat, before, obviously everybody gets together before a panel and chats about what we should say, what we shouldn't say. Tell me about your most embarrassing moment that ended with you naked or semi-naked outside your hotel room at 3 a.m. That's a different panel.
You sure you have the right notes?
This card says these are not the notes to read from. These are the notes. Okay. Spilling the beans, 10 DLC. So really what we're here to talk about is the effect and the process that happened in the US. As you can tell, I'm very, very American. And I work at the campaign registry and have worked alongside all of these wonderful people up here on stage and many people in the audience. And what we're really talking about is where we started, what we have gone through, the pitfalls that we all fell into and scrambled our way out of and actually created a product that today is working quite effectively. So, I'm going to start in a weird way. Now, everybody, but just so you know, everybody had asked me to sort of send them the questions ahead of time, and I was like, nah, I'm not going to do that. So, have you seen a decrease in spam traffic in your organizations or in the networks from the introduction of 10 DLC registration? Has that had a positive effect? I'm going to start with Michael here because he's just to my left.
So a reduction in fraud and abuse due to the introduction of 10 DLC in the US. What I have seen is the ability for us to get much more stringent and be able to segment that true 10 DLC traffic from the true abusive traffic, be able to actually tighten thresholds, be able to do more analysis on the content in near real time based on the simple fact that we know what is legitimate 10 DLC versus what is impersonation of legitimate 10 DLC. So has it gone down? The quick answer is yes, but the longer answer is the industry, the abuse actors shift and migrate to very different tactics in a matter of seconds.
Right.
So it does make it more challenging. We do have better ideas, better visibility, better grasp on it, but there is the challenge that the ecosystem changes just as fast, well, faster than what we do.
So the bad actors are better identified and faster identified, and then that information can be shared within the ecosystem to help.
Absolutely could be. Yep.
Right. Allison, I'm going to come to you. From Twilio's perspective, how have you seen this registration process have an effect within, say, how you're looking at customer base, how you're projecting forwards in terms of even revenues?
Yeah, so can everyone hear me? I just want to apologize. I lost my luggage last night, and so I'm wearing my travel clothes. I just wanted to give context. I'm not, just...
It is a very cool tracksuit, though.
Thank you for that. So, thanks. So, I think, I feel like my mic's hot. So, I think from our perspective, what we're seeing is, Twilio is diligently working to get our customers registered. And I think one thing that has become very apparent is that there are a lot of unregistered senders today. And I think, I know we're not the only network that has this. I think, but functionally at the scale that Twilio operates, it's a really interesting, if you look at it academically, it's like, wow, okay, we're getting all of this done, and the categorization of things and the breakdown and the development of processes in a really quick timeline. But I think, with customers, I think, and this actually speaks to the previous panel, because I think one thing that is really important in going through this is I really want to raise a flag for the Canadian market that if you're really going to move into 10DLC, you should not be running this traffic now until you have a process in place. Because you're going to have all of these edge cases where there's established traffic that is running in a sort of quasi, like, consensual way in terms of with the carriers, right? And you're going to find yourself in a situation where you have someone who's been running traffic for 3 years on 10-digit number, and then when the process becomes formalized, that brand business is told, actually, you can't run on this channel anymore because you don't comply with this rule and this rule and this rule. And so I think from our side, we're having a lot of really interesting and difficult conversations with customers around, so we know we've enabled you to run this traffic this way for this many years, through these interconnect pathways. But now, everything has to get registered. We really mean it. We have a date, like Twilio has published a date, it's public. We're really driving towards this compliance commitment. And I think it's really, it's challenging. It's hard with customers. It's a really hard conversation.
Right, and Jonathan, when it comes to that customer communication that you've had at Sinch, how have you found that? Because very often, I mean, we all know that customers don't read anything. They never read. They expect you to hold their hand and to explain to them 20 times how to do it, and then expect you to do it for them. Mm-hmm. So how's that been at Sinch and being able to communicate a somewhat complex process in the US of 10DLC?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we didn't send a lot of traffic until really 2019. It was a sanctioned channel, or at least working towards that with our direct carrier integrations. So we have a bit of a benefit because we came in and got to grow some of our senders here. But we've had challengers working with ASPs, and I think you have to start from the top up. You've got the same kind of ecosystem in Canada as you do in the US. You've got DCAs, you have CSPs, CMPs that kind of sit somewhere in between, and then the further you go down to the brand. So it makes a lot more sense to educate your large resellers and ASPs first and ensure that they're accountable, and then make sure that trickles all the way down to the brand. Because a lot of times, spam doesn't have to be someone nefarious sending disallowed content, but just someone who's not approaching it the right way and isn't identifying their message. So it's like in the earlier example, someone that's a fitness instructor, it should start out with saying, hey, this is who I am, and this is a business message. You'll note in the content, giving them an affordment option to opt out. All those kind of things that we set as a standardized practice so that communication is effective.
Eric, I know that you've had various positions in the industry, and most recently at netnumber. But I know that you have also managed mid-market teams in that time. And I would imagine that when you're looking at some of the account managers or people that are having to communicate this, these aren't people that just have 2 accounts, 3 accounts, right? They have, 50, 60, 100 accounts? And you might start in account 1, really explaining 10DLC, the reason behind it, why it's positive, the benefits, and by account 100, it's like, just sign it.
So to comment on that, one thing that's often ignored or forgotten, at least initially, when any conversation around 10DLC happens are the people. And everything happens because of people. The people at the operator level, the people at the CPaaS level, the people at the enterprise level. Specifically to your question, when the launch was happening, I was running the mid-market team along with Jonathan to my left here, and we had regular conversations around the crush that team had to deal with all at once. The clients that launch 10DLC are usually specific to the mid-market segment, often there are exceptions, to the mid-market segment or to the ASP world, which means when they're classified internally within the CPaaS groups, they're usually managed by the same group of individuals, small group of individuals, or often the same individual. So all of the inquiries that they make are directed at 1 or 2 people within that organization. And that group within the organization that manages this type of client, They have a lot of other clients. They're overwhelmed. And because they're not the large enterprise or the strategic account group, they're often a little bit younger and a little bit inexperienced. All of this is the perfect storm. And if there's a way to buffer that or to at least spread it out a little bit more evenly, it would make the entire integration process significantly smoother going forward.
And Eric is appearing on late night radio, and he has that voice, right? I could listen to you all day. Marcelo, from Infobip's perspective, I know prior to Infobip you were at Cineverse. So how have you found the integration process and working with customers and helping them communicate this information? Where have you found some of the stumbling blocks in that?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because looking at lessons learned, I think I have more lessons learned from my time at Cineverse. Just, everything was early days, was very focused in one of the big tier ones in the US. And they have three major concerns. Compliance, it's on everybody's mind. They had concerns about cannibalization of the short code traffic that never came to happen, or at least not yet. And then they had concerns with their reputation. They didn't think that any of this would be worth them making the front page of the Wall Street Journal because of some silly, stuff that was sent out there. So I feel like a lot of that got put to rest, given the way they went live, been very granular, been very, as surgical as you can be. It's not perfect. But being able to identify at the campaign level, being able to identify the CSP, there's obviously all kinds of efforts that go into that. The guy next to me here sees a lot of traffic there, and you sift through that and you learn as the day goes by. So, I think of the Canadian market, typically sometimes people refer as the 51st state. It's not like that, right? There is its own particularities. I knew Tony would call on that. But I think there is definitely some lessons learned. Don't let perfect be the enemy of very good. I think it would be a message I kind of try to not preaching to the choir.
Right. And John, from... Hey, John. So Aegis, and I know Ian from WMC Global is also in the room. There's Ian over there. Hey, Ian. So between WMC Global and Aegis, obviously there's a lot of validation and verification that goes into the registration process. The initial identity check that we do in the TCR's system is done by Aegis. And from the processing point of view, was there a challenge initially to process all of these registrations and to be able to be effective and accurate within that?
Yeah, I think it was very interesting because in the beginning, we really hadn't been able to get the data quality rules, in place, and I'm not necessarily sure that perhaps some of the historical brands that were running, the data was old or the data wasn't quite there, and so we had massive, issues rejecting, records that were coming in because we just couldn't match them to a government database, different places in the world, if you will. But I think it's something that we have overcome significantly. I can tell you we get 6,000 to 8,000 transactions successfully processed every day of new brands. Even on the weekends, we're doing a couple thousand, which tells me there's automation running in this market now too. Even on holidays, we're processing a couple thousand brands coming through. So it's definitely come a very long way to where it's now running very smoothly. We still have some issues, here and there, and there's certain countries that have problems with the different kinds of tax IDs that they use and all that, but I think we've been able to really grow it effectively, putting out materials that help people, operate more effectively. And I want to say we've done almost 800,000 transactions this year, 1.5 million since launch successfully.
And that's a point, the scale that we're talking about here, from shortcode registration, which was the mainstay of trusted registration of content within the US market, in many markets. When you look at in the US around, and correct me if I'm wrong, everybody in the panel, but around 17,000-ish shortcodes in market today in the US. To give a sense of the scale, when we started registering 10 DLC, we're at around 1.5 million brands and about 1.8 million campaigns. So the scale is huge, and there's no change to the size of the organization's teams in many respects that are handling this. Or have people had to scale up? Allison, has Twilio scaled up to handle this?
Yeah, we have. Yeah. I think, another thing in terms of the lessons learned, I think, is that if you're looking at rolling something out, right, you have an opportunity in Canada to really examine what has happened in the US and say, this could work for our market, this isn't going to work for our market, right? And I think, because I know there is 10-digit traffic running, but at the same time, it's not nearly at the scale that we have it. It was running in the US prior to the carriers taking action, sort of having their hands forced to create some way of knowing what's on the network. And I think my colleague Paul Wheeler brought this up, and I think it's something that we should also, Michael, you can speak to this as well, is the importance of we get all the registration done, we have all of this done, yes, they do this, yes, they do this, but at the end of the day, when a consumer receives a message on their handset, is it actually what it's supposed to be, right? Is it, how much drift has occurred? And I think what Paul was talking about filtering, but I think, in some ways 10DLC, unless it's a landline number that's being used by a small business, it's actually a caller text situation, there is the ability to change numbers relatively swiftly because they're not that expensive. There are processes in place where it is automated. And so I think taking that into account in the way things are rolled out in Canada, I think is important. And I think, a conversation that has taken place in the US with a bunch of folks is, with hindsight, would you roll everything out so that you can do everything on all the numbers, right? Or would you have some numbers do some things and other numbers do other things, right? And everyone has an opinion based on where they are in the ecosystem. But if you pan up and you look at things from what's going to serve consumers in the most effective way, I think that's a valuable. I have no input there because I don't know the Canadian market that well, but I think it's definitely a worthwhile conversation to have, in partnership with the mobile operators, with CTA, with all of the players that have a major stake in ensuring that whatever gets rolled out is as successful as possible for everyone in this room, and more importantly, everyone that has a device in their pocket, right?
Yeah.
Can I add a
Jonathan.
quick statement? So, having seen like the early adaptation of brand registration verification from WMC and both Aegis, there's been a lot of speculation whether people thought it worked. But I've looked at thousands of these myself. So when we have a bad actor, one of the first things I do is go look at their scoring. And I found just about repeatedly, when you see that magic score of 50 and those below that, they're usually some form of problematic sender there. So as you look forward to how you're going to do this better, learn the lessons at who needs to require enhanced vetting. So maybe the political senders or folks that are ASPs and resellers, you really want to know if they've got established best practices, if they've got a reputation of being problematic. Start establishing that groundwork now so that you can get that done, and also allow time, because we know those enhanced vets take more time, but you can start laying the foundation to get those folks through the process in the door so you know your senders, and then you can trickle that down, and then also establish who you expect to have standard vetting or verification. So that's some lessons learned that I think can be applied here to help the onboarding process, but you have to know who's behind the content all the way down to the actual content provider.
So it really, I was going to say that the KYC element is really critical here, and establishing when you register, I mean, any registration process, you register the who is it and what are they sending. That's basically, it is So we're just seeing a message come up on here. It's very interesting. It's like a prompt. So when the registration process is, who are you, what are you doing? It is a very basic set of questions, but the information data that goes into that helps KYC. And as Jonathan was saying, when you have that basic information on KYC, you then really get to understand what it is and who is it that could be abusing your network, and then what you can do about it. Jonathan?
Yeah, I was going to say with the scoring that we're providing, which creates an amount of messaging that can be sent, and some carriers and other carriers are different, but the scoring is essentially a risk score, behavioral risk score. One of the concepts, though, that we introduced was that very new companies have no history. Therefore, you really can't assess their behavioral history. And so they wind up with a low score. And this was driven by the carriers saying this is how we want it to be done, and it's configured for them. But what we need also to do, that we're learning, is we need some sort of feedback to be able to identify those good players that are small companies that need to do more messaging,
So
that
it's
their score can
reputational.
be enhanced and move up as they demonstrate their good behavior. And we all are working on the feedback loops to do that. And then I think the second big learning opportunity that I think was talked about at MOG by a friend in the audience there, Alex, was that when we do see a bad actor, the carriers have the ability to go in and shut that phone number off immediately, if you will, right through the netnumber interface and the TCR portal. And so that being said, it's complete control. Then we get feedback because we can tie the phone number to the campaign, we can tie the campaign to the brand, and now we know who the brand is. And then we do a deep dive on the brand and say, okay, they've got 180 companies, they're working through a registered agent in this city here, and so we know who all the bad actors are so that they technically can't come back, right? And if we can communicate that, it creates a good loop.
Michael, you had a point.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of expand on what John had said around the feedback loop, the mechanism to get information back into the ecosystem that helps reset or adjust, if you will, how a sender, a brand, whatever part of the ecosystem, how it is, how it's seen going forward. The next thing is around drift that we had talked about. I think the drift is not, right now operators are kind of taking the stance on trying to find that drift. I think it's actually a whole ecosystem problem that right now in the US, when a brand registers, there's sample content that they're supposed to follow. And how many people are actually checking if that content verifies with what they've sent over the last 2-3 months, right? And campaigns change. It happens, right? And marketing campaigns change month to month, holiday to holiday, et cetera. And being able to enable the brand or the whoever does the registration to easily modify that based on what they are sending, I think is something that also really needs to be taken into consideration.
So I'm going to pause there for a second and ask if there's any questions, because we could talk forever.
Yeah.
So if there's not any questions, I've got some other questions. But if there are questions, hi, Alex.
Hi, I'm with AT&T and MOG. How much of a challenge has it been to deal with in your implementation of 10DLC the diversity of requirements from different carriers?
Excellent question.
Has that been a major impediment?
Yeah, did we rehearse this?
Make sure you pay him that.
Right, yeah.
I know. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's funny because the previous panel, they were talking about reaching consensus. Easier said than done,
Yeah.
right? Even in the US, there's no consensus at the moment, right? Even I was talking to my vantage point when I was at Cineverse. There was that little bit of who's going to go first. Will the red guys go first, then the blue guys follow, then the magenta guys follow? See how I kind of avoid but ultimately, there was one that went first, and the implementation method, the way they went about it, separating lanes of traffic, P2P here, A2P there, trust but verify, slap your hand if you misbehave, while others went way more granular. And that's, I guess, credit to TCR being part of that as well. I'm not advocating that the exact same model should be followed in Canada, but as much as possible, having this type of consensus, it makes everybody's life easier. The brands will understand, the CSPs, the DCAs, especially, there's a lot of conglomerates that do business in the US and Canada as well, so it makes everything simple. If you think of shortcode to shortcode, they're not exactly the same in Canada and the US, but they're pretty similar, right? So it kind of enables that, and it creates more volumes, more revenue. Everybody's kind of happy. But we dealt with it.
Confusion.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we were very successful, though, working with at least two of the carriers in terms of opening up our scoring algorithms. In other words, how do we score legal matters, regulatory matters, criminal matters, financial matters, international sanctions watch lists, to create a score for a company's history, behavioral history. And oh, by the way, do they have TCPA violations, right? Telecommunications, regulatory violations? Do they have any kind of consumer fraud? And we opened up those algorithms to the legal teams of the carriers, and they pretty much were in agreement with that for us. So that was that's an upside. That was very fortunate. But they're taking the most of the risk, quite frankly, since they're the big names in the industry, if you will. Regulators go after them, so the point is to give them the opportunity to define what is risk to me.
Anyone else want to answer Alex's question?
I was just going to say, I think this is another, can you hear me better now that I turned my microphone around? Did I do that right? So I think the other thing I would state is that in the same sort of lessons learned, I understand the interest in the previous group to say, 6 months, 12 months, but what you're going to have in 6 to 12 months as opposed to what you're going to have in 18 to 24 months with a cross-carrier set of uniform implementation, I mean, you will leapfrog where you will be as an ecosystem if you take the time to drive uniformity and a commonality within the ecosystem, because the implementation will just roll, right? It won't be, we have to do this over here and this over here. And actually, we kind of want to change this one thing here because, this happens. And a lot of this has to do with, lawyers and policies and network obligations and things that aren't discussed in this room that the carriers all have to deal with, right? So, best efforts, but I think it is important to make sure that set everyone up for success.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Following on from Allison's point, this is an evolutionary process. It's going to evolve and improve over time. It has improved significantly over the last several years in the United States. Nothing's perfect coming out, but it moves quickly once it's up and running. Let's not waste time, because we're forgetting the monetization aspect over here. There is traffic running. There's a lot of money that is simply slipping through the cracks that no one is taking advantage of, and the operators are missing out on it, the CPaaS companies are missing out on it, all the infrastructure players are missing out on it, and they're bad actors that are allowed to exist in that market. This is actually one of those few instances where by moving forward quicker in a uniform fashion, you can improve the overall state of the ecosystem and make more money.
Yeah. Paul.
Hi, Paul from Twilio. This is a great panel. I love everybody that's up there, but to me, one thing that's missing is the carrier perspective. And so, thanks, Alex. So if you put yourselves in the carrier shoes for a moment and ask that same question, what do you think the lessons learned were from a carrier perspective, and what do you think the lift has been from a carrier perspective?
I think from my point of view, one of the, it really depends on which carrier you have up here. Because I think from working with multiple carriers, every one of them look at various different bits of the ecosystem and how they've gotten value from it, or whatever, or what the shortfalls were from it. So it really depends on, kind of going back to Allison's point about the uniformity between the carriers and making sure that as you know, as an entire country, all the carriers coming together and coming up with the what's best suits Canada, I think is a key point there, right? Because one carrier may say that you know have a lot of challenges. Another one sees a lot of benefit. Another one is kind of in the middle, right? There's pluses and minuses. So realistically, it comes down to depends on who you talk to.
Yeah, I would add to that, if
Come.
I can. Just, I think to be Captain Obvious, regardless of which one of the three, I think they all would agree that more granularity is better than not enough granularity, right? That helps with monetization. It helps with the identification and sifting through bad actors, good actors, what kind of traffic you want to enable. There is, back to the compliance, there's, regulations that can change, around what's allowed, what's not allowed. One thing I personally didn't see moving over to this channel was election political kind of traffic, and that became really big in the US. I don't know how that's going to be in Canada, but it becomes a vehicle that people start using. The monetization is almost a consequence of that, but having that granularity enables the brands and carriers and all the stakeholders to kind of have a better handle on what goes through and avoid backdoors as well.
Right. Jonathan, you had a point.
Just going to say that if you look at the release notes, what TCR has had to do, basically in response to carrier feedback, to have MNO blocking functionality and also hold have migration functionality in there. These are all things that have had to been built to accommodate an evolving landscape. So you can see and learn from that as a perfect example.
But all the conversations you can have many, many conversations at the beginning. And there's always going to be something which is like, oh, we forgot about that. Or there was this edge case that we never took into account. Or there's this way that a company operates or carrier operates that was not considered because it wasn't considered the core part of it. And so there's always going to be those edge cases. There's always going to be that development. And one thing that's happened, especially in the US, is that you're forever looking and learning and trying to figure out how you can make it more effective and more efficient. Yet at the same time, you are creating friction for a deliberate reason, because if there isn't friction, it makes it too easy for people to come on board and abuse the networks, from the CSPs, the DCAs, and the carriers.
Can I add my friend Alex from AT&T, or our friend Alex from AT&T, as I mentioned earlier, he said he's got control because he can go into the portal and he can shut off that campaign. But the other thing that's happening is we're seeing the 7727 data coming in, we're seeing the 7726 data come in, and there's a phone number there, and we can tie that back to the campaign and the brand. And so it's become there's a lot more clarity. Alex, anything to add? Sorry. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll let Alex.
Well, it certainly it's done a lot of things. There's certainly the ability to play whack-a-mole with bigger animals and animals that don't morph in identity as easily. That's a huge benefit. But one of the initial thoughts behind this was to try to push. Basically, to give the CSPs an opportunity to express to the carriers who are policing traffic with their own filters their perceptions of the quality of a customer, and I think we've really succeeded in many ways. I'm not sure that there's always room for improvement, but I hope that's. I hope that's come true, that there's now a better way to tell the carriers what your good traffic is, what you really trust, and what you want to get pushed through, what should be pushed through, what we can trust, and what we really have to take more of our chances with. And that was the goal.
Allison, you had to...
Yeah, I was just going to add, when traffic started running through the ICV in the US, I was at a carrier at the time. And I think the one thing I can say is that for the market, just to make sure that you're not training the bad actors how to fake out the systems, right? Like, snowshoeing would not have been a problem had, you know, the ICV rates been set to 1 message a second to enforce P2P rates, right? Things like that, where, you know, like, pricing is a great, you know, viewing pricing as a deterrent for bad actors is not, it's not a thing. Like, if they have one really good phishing attack, it doesn't matter, right? So making sure that the way you're approaching the control points when there isn't a formalization in place, to make sure that those are actually going to yield the results that you want them to yield before there is something that is actually programmatized and integrated, where, you know, you're taking the edge cases and integrating them into the system and continually going through that iterative process to make the system include everything that's going on in the market.
Thank you.
So-
And
Yeah,
we're at time. We're way over time, actually, which is totally unexpected for us. So I'd like to thank Jonathan, Eric, Allison, John, Marcelo, and Michael for joining me on this panel. I'm Stefan. And of course, if you've got any questions for any of these folks on anything, I'm sure they'll be happy to be grabbed and interrogated under hot lights and things like that. And if you need to know anything about the campaign registry, how awesome we are, how we do things so amazingly, I'm here as well. And so are many of the other people from the campaign registry to answer any of your questions about how we can do amazing things for you. So thanks very much. Thanks, Murph. Appreciate it.